Hi, my name is Dave Reski, founder and president of Now Speed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of In the Now, where we focus on uncovering the myths and misunderstandings of marketing and leadership with some of the world's most interesting people. And my guest today is Wendy Pease. Wendy is the president and owner of Rapport International, a language services company that provides high quality written translation and spoken interpretation in over 200 languages. She's the author of the book, The Language of Global Marketing, and host of the podcast, The Global Marketing Show. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, David. It's wonderful to be here and talk to you.
Yes, it's always great to have other podcasters on the show and hear from your experience, and really appreciate you being here to share what you've learned with our audience. So thank you very much for being on.
Oh, my pleasure. It is good to talk to other podcasters because there is so much knowledge out there, and I've really enjoyed listening to so many podcasts. You learn so much.
Absolutely. Well, you're obviously very passionate about connecting people across languages and cultures. How did you get interested in the translation business?
Oh, that was really interesting. I had wanted to own my own company after business school. I had owned one before, but I didn't have an idea of what to start. So I was laid off on both maternity leaves, and I was kind of floundering because I didn't want to go back to corporate because Tuesday nights were the worst. Monday, I was so exhausted from the weekend and taking care of young children that, I could organize, accomplish, and do on Monday. But by Tuesday nights, I was like, I'm working all day. I'm not around my kids. I really miss them. And then it was a long way until at least Friday. I knew I'd see them the next day. And I thought, I really don't want to go back into that. I want something that I can balance my work and life. And something I'm really, really passionate about. So I found this little translation company for sale online. And I was like, wow, languages and cultures. I mean, I've lived internationally. I love travel. I love cultures. I love learning about that. I love words. I love writing. And so it was it was the only company I looked at, and I ended up buying it, which is highly unusual, but lucky for me, it all worked out. And here we are almost 19 years later.
Wow, that's such a great path toward entrepreneurship. So really focused on work-life balance, which is so cool. And then finding a business online that you could get and enjoy. That sounds really, really good.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Mythbusters questions. So I like to start these conversations with what I call a Mythbusters question. And in your experience with global translation, what's something about global marketing or global translation that's out there that people are talking about that's just not true?
That machine translation or AI is going to take over for humans and doing quality translation.
Wow.
Yeah.
AI is such a hot topic these days, right?
Yes.
Everybody thinks that AI is going to take over for everything. Why is it not going to take over in global translation?
There are so many regional differences and idiosyncrasies and hidden meanings and word usage patterns that it's not a word for word direct translation. So machines can do like basic stuff, but when you start really trying to do the quirky little parts of language, you need somebody that not only is bilingual, but understands the cultural connotations and messaging of the language and can either portray that across or say, hey, this isn't going to work across languages. So it's been really fascinating to watch machine translation, because when I first got into the industry, people asked, can you even do this? And then it was like, oh, Google Translate's coming out. Is this going to take over your business? And now we're starting to separate out, okay, where can we use machine translation or AI or neuro-linguistic, translation? And, there's all sorts of terms that are coming out. And where do we still need to use humans? And so what we found is it's just elevated the demand and the usage for translation. And there is still a really good, high need for translation services on anything that's going to help a company grow or something that could give the company liability.
Well, that makes total sense to me. It makes total sense that humans are better at the machines. But take me back to where it started with, was it Google Translator? How did machines even get involved in the translation? When did that get good enough that we started to use machines for translation, and where did it start to be used?
My first memory of it was really Google Translate, because they were kind of leading it. They had so much content that they could try to, they were building algorithms to match words. So if you put dog in there, dog is a pretty simple word, you know, there it's going to be able to translate. But you put something like love in there, we only have like one kind of love or one word for it. But in Chinese, there's all different kinds of words for love. You can have love for a parent, love for a child, love for a spouse, love for a friend. So there's a lot of a lot of different loves that can be translated into. And so I play around with it often, and I'll go on and I'm like, how good is it capturing information? And so I think this was about, see, I bought the company in 2004, and probably around the late, you know, just before 2008, 2009. This is when it was like the industry was starting to look and say, okay, is this going to take over? The Google plugins started coming in. And if you're using that on your website, just call me and I'll tell you a better way to do it. It looks cheap and fast, but it's a waste of time and it could be causing problems with your website. Then probably in the 2014, I started seeing more good use cases for it. And one of them that I talk about in my book is TripAdvisor. So if you go on there, they've used a human to translate their whole platform. And they have very strict rules about how you can write things, you know, like number of bedrooms. And they use pictures really well that are recognized across languages. So they have been very careful to build their platform so they can leverage machine translation, or translation memory, I should say more accurately, which I can explain, to translate, you know, as people are adding more content in. Then they use machine translation for reviews. Now, there are so many reviews that are coming on there, it would be hard to have a human do them. And I don't, as a user, expect them to be perfect. I want to see their star ranking. If it's a 1 or a 5, that gives me a lot of information. And then the Google Translate is going to give me the gist of, was there a problem with the landlord? Was there a problem with the place? Was the location bad? So that's an appropriate use for Google Translation. But companies that are using it thoughtfully clearly separate out when they're using a human, when they're using a machine. I just talked to the supplier, or I've been in email contact with the Amazon supplier diversity person, and they also are very clear on when they're using humans and when they're using machines. So very knowledgeable companies, you know, have figured out where that is. And I have a chapter in the book that talks about what you translate and what you can consider for machine translation or not. Now, I mentioned something in there called translation memory. This is very different than machine translation. Translation memory is, say I translate your website for you, and we keep a memory of that. So we know exactly how, you know, what your differentiators are. Then when you go to do a brochure and you're using the same differentiators articulated the same way, which, as you know, is good marketing, you want that repetition and you want clarity, we can pull the memory up and say, you used it on your website like this. Now for your brochure, we recommend that you use it like this, because it's the same. You've got consistency of voice. It's not a machine doing it. It's just a machine recognizing the content we've already put in there.
Yeah,
So that's a ton of information.
and I think that makes a lot of sense. But you know, I'm curious, do you think that machine translation, in the limited sense, like Google Translate, has expanded companies' markets? Basically, are more companies going global earlier, and is that then expanded the need for human translation to communicate more globally? Or do you think the companies that were destined to go global were doing it globally anyway? In other words, do you think this machine translation technology has helped build your business and helped companies grow global faster?
I don't think machine translation has done that. Helped companies grow faster. I do think that it has decreased. Well, I think there's a number of factors that have decreased the fear of going international. Number one is Google Translate, that just, oh, this is giving me accessibility to language. I can use it in a taxi cab and it can help facilitate my conversation. I think something else that's helped with global growth is millennials. They started traveling when they were younger, and they've been much more about experiences than gathering stuff. So that's the millennials and the Gen X, Gen Y and Gen Z, not the Gen Xers, they're the older ones. And so I think that the younger generations that have traveled more are now more open to different cultures and more opportunities for doing business. That's led to digital nomadship, which helps with global business. And I think the third thing is that just the internet has helped with global business. We have clients that if they're watching their marketing metrics or their Google Analytics, they're saying we're getting a lot of inquiries or people coming to our site from Germany, China, I'm going through the countries that I've heard the story about, should I add in the Google plugin? Or they recognize that the Google plugin isn't good. And they're saying, how do I add translation in here so I can capture those buyers and convert them, because they can see the visitors, but not the conversions. And so I think it's been a consolidation of all that. I don't think the Google Translate has helped with business. I actually think it hurts. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is that if you go to a website, number one, it's hard to find the Google plugin oftentimes. People will bury it down in the bottom, or even if they put it at the top, the languages aren't translated. So for fun, I do a lot of things for fun about language and culture, but I went to a Chinese website and I was looking for one with the Google Translate plugin, and I found it, because I could recognize the emblem. And then I did the drop-down menu and it was all in Chinese. Now, I don't speak Chinese. I speak a few words of Chinese, but it's not one that I know. I couldn't pick out English. So I couldn't get to the English language site. So that's the same thing. If you were to put the Google language plugin on your site, it's all in English. So somebody coming in that doesn't speak English isn't going to be able to translate it. Then if they do, it looks like gobbledygook. You can have things in the wrong format. You can have words that don't make sense. And so a buyer is going to go, well, I'm not going to be able to work with these people because I'm not going to be able to understand them. So you can see the bounce rate is very, very high off of that. There was another reason.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll come back to you. As you think about, machine translation. So you're saying with machine translation, if you do any translation at all, machine or human, you have to think it all the way through for the whole website. The menus, the tags, everything's got to be thought through. You can't just put a plug-in on a page and expect it to do any good, right? Even if it does it, 95% of the way, it's going to reflect badly on your brand. So if this is important to your company, you've got to do it well, right? And all the way through.
Yeah, you made up a really good point, which I don't usually pull out, but yeah, you put the Google Translate in your meta tags and your titles, your drop-down menus, all those things aren't translated. Plus, when you do a website, you pick out your keywords that you want to optimize for. And when you translate, our translators just don't translate the keywords. They do a little bit of research and give options if there are. So then the marketing person can look at the analytics and figure out which keywords make sense to optimize for.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. Oh, I know the other thing is that there's liability with Google Translate. There has been some legal cases in the medical and law enforcement situations where they've used Google Translate and it's caused a problem. And so they've run into it, caused the death of a high school student athlete. And with law enforcement, it caused a problem. So I think that there's going to be more and more cases coming out where people are not accurately assessing whether they need to have a human involved.
Yeah, I think if you care about what your potential customers think about your product, know about your product, learn about your product, it's funny when I travel. One of my hobbies is to look at travel brochures or menus that have been translated badly. Like if you go into a
Yes.
restaurant in Spain, you can always tell when a non-English speaker has translated the menu into something. And at that point, it's harmless because I'm getting, the eggs instead of the pasta or whatever. It doesn't really matter that much. But it's just funny to read the description and all that. And you can just see how that can be badly done. But on your website, if you're looking at global customers, right, you could have people order the wrong thing, use it in the wrong way, hurt
Yeah.
themselves. There's just, and not only for a liability, but just from a, protecting your brand and your image. If you care about what people are learning about your website, you've got to do it the right way, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that story about the menus of the travel brochures. I still remember this day walking by a placard out in front of a restaurant. They had chocolate soup. I'm like, it's funny. I have no idea what chocolate soup is. I was tempted to go in and order, but we were, off in another direction. So if you or any of your listeners find funny things like that, send them to me because we put them out on social media all the time for a laugh. So certainly connect with me and send, Wendy Pease on LinkedIn and send them to me. And David, I hope you're traveling a lot and find some.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely send you some because it's a little hobby I like to pick up on. What about the opposite attitude? And we see this with a lot of our clients where they say, "Look, if anybody wants to do business with us, they just have to speak English. We just really appeal to an English speaking audience, and there's enough people out there that speak English. We're just going to go after those." What do you say to those people?
Well, those are probably the same people that don't have diversity on their senior leadership board, and they're growing slower. They're not as thriving. They're not as innovative. I mean, all the statistics show that if people aren't going to buy. I mean, I have them all here. 95% of the people, even if they're bilingual, would rather be on a website in their native language, even if they're bilingual. 1 in 5 Europeans that are bilingual or multilingual say they never browse in a language other than their own. 42% say they'll never purchase products in other languages. And well over half of them say that they'll spend more money if you provide language translation. And then the Department of Commerce from the US, measures exporters, and they found that the companies that exports have higher revenues, higher profits, they pay higher salaries, they have higher valuations. They're more innovative. And so all the metrics across the way say, go international, or at least provide, even here in the United States, if you're only selling here, look at your markets that you're servicing and seeing if people speak other languages, you'll grow faster.
Yeah, so there's a big business advantage to communicating to people in their own language.
Yeah. So do you know what the native or the official languages of the United States?
No, I think it's English, but what is it?
There is none.
Really?
There is none. No, and our government has laws that if they provide services, if the government, state and local and federal, provides services to people who don't speak English, if it's over 5% of their audience or clientele, mandatory by law, they have to provide translation. So
Yeah.
all these people in the United States saying, you're in the United States, you should speak English. I mean, there's no reason for that except for fear.
Yeah, very interesting. One of my experiences in travel is that as an English speaker, I feel very spoiled. I feel
Mhm.
like, and this, you could correct me on this in a heartbeat, but this is just my own experience. I've been to 61 countries, so I love to travel.
Oh, nice.
But when I travel, usually I'm going to a place because I want to see it. I'm going to a tourist area and I'm going to the touristy thing in that area.
Yeah.
And my experience is that there's always the people in those areas often speak their own language and they speak English. There's always
Yeah.
this, it feels like there's this bias toward English in almost every place I can find an English speaker because I'm going to a tourist area. Do you think that bias biases business people to feel like the same thing is true on their website and their marketing. I can speak my everybody will cater to me because I speak English just like they do when I'm traveling.
Yes, we are very blessed that so many people speak English and you can go international, and that's one of the languages you can get by in. Speaking English to the level of speaking to a tourist on the same kind of words that you'd use over and over is, where is this? Or I'd like to order chicken, or can you tell me, directions? Those are words that you're using over and over again. But our clients and the people that we've seen do successful international work want to make people feel more welcome. And so we had a client that was going over to present in Korea, and they were the only company that translated their slides into Korean, even though all the people at the table spoke enough English to do business with them. They won the deal simply because, and they came back and told us this, it was so memorable to me, because they had translated their slides. And so did the people need it? Maybe, maybe not. But that comfort that they had in truly understanding what they're buying. So take the blessing that you can do, this elementary English conversation. But if you really want to connect and buy from somebody, recognize that their English may sound better than it actually is, but you're going to develop a better relationship if you actually hire an interpreter to help, or you translate the materials, or you translate your website and let somebody go through the buyer's journey in their language.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. One of my personal experiences in that area is with my mom. So my mom grew up in Germany. And so I started, when I was a 2-year old, I started speaking German, and when I was speaking English. And so now I can speak a little bit of German to my mom. But I speak German. I used to say that I speak German like a 4-year-old until I had a 4-year-old. And then I realized I really speak German like a 2-year-old in like these cryptic words. But it's funny when I go home and I talk to my mom, and she's a very good English speaker because she's lived in the country for many, many years. But when she speaks to me in German, I understand everything that she says. And it's really because of what you just said, which is she always talks about the same thing. We talk about food, we talk about family, we talk about household stuff. So there's a very small vocabulary, I understand. Right. But I in no way can take that experience and say, if I were to go to Germany and try to exist in the German culture, I would last like 10 seconds. I couldn't order in a restaurant. I couldn't like get a taxi. I couldn't like have a conversation with anybody. Certainly couldn't do business. So just because I know a few words doesn't really get me by. So your clients have got to realize that it's super important to communicate in detail in a way that they can be understood to their audiences in so many languages.
Right. It's absolutely true. And I took an advanced Spanish class when I was in graduate school. And it was really interesting because the teacher said, I can tell where people have learned their language. People who knew the words for like broom and dustpan and vacuum and stuff had done homestays to learn their Spanish. I hadn't done a homestay, so I had no idea how to say broom. But there's, those subtleties. And when we bring on new linguists for either written translation or spoken interpretation, we test them. And so, we do medical terminology for the interpreters. And if they don't know the words, then even if they're fully bilingual, they've got to go off and study and become acclimated to be able to do that. And our translators, these are really bright people. They're fully bilingual. A lot of them have masters and PhDs. They're very accomplished in their own right, and they spend a lot of time thinking about the best way to say something, and they do a lot of research online to make sure it's accurate. We don't just pick up anybody who's bilingual to do the translation work. And just on a side, while I'm thinking of it, it takes as long to do a translation as it does to write something high quality. So there's a lot of thought that goes into that.
So 200 languages that your company supports. How many languages should a company translate their material into if they want to be communicating most markets? Like, is there an 80-20 rule in translation? Do I need to be in 100 languages or 50 or 8? Or what do you advise clients?
Well, okay, let me throw that back. How many countries should you go to be considered a global traveler?
I think 61.
62 sounds pretty, 61 sounds pretty good. I
Exactly.
know a lot of people that are aiming to get to the Century Club on that. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. We do 200 languages and we do some obscure ones that people have probably never heard of. But if you really break it down, there's probably a couple of dozen that we provide most frequently. If you're going international, of course, you're going to hit the European languages and the top Asian countries. Um, and it's less about, which languages do you need to do versus what is the strategic plan that you have for entering markets. So, I see all sorts of reasons for companies entering in a market, but the best is to think who has the best need for our project, for our products or services, and what are the best laws, what's the regulatory environment, what's the competition like. So you do a strategic plan, and then language is part of that, knowing that you're going to build that in. And people look at translation costs, but really it's what's the return on the investment that you get for doing your translation. So many companies say, well, I'm going to go into England, Australia, or New Zealand because they speak English. But what they're doing is they're going in against all the other American companies that are entering those markets, and you're competing a lot more. So if you can have higher growth rates by going into Spain, then do a little bit of translation and modify it. And you can go to all the other markets then that speak Spanish, when that matches your strategic plan.
Yeah, and that gives you a big advantage. Which markets or industries you think are most interested or most engaged in translation? I could see tech companies, and we work with people across a number of industries, but our tech clients seem to be focused on English first, and then they do a few European languages as they kind of grow. But I can imagine like a consumer products company. I was thinking about a company like Gillette, where you've got really a global market. You've got to be in every language, right? So you could be in maybe not every language, but you might be in dozens and dozens of languages. So do you see a different demand by industry for translation services? And are some industries more engaged with it and kind of get it faster? Or is it vary by company and really smart business strategy across industries?
It varies by company and smart business strategy. And what's really interesting to me is that a lot of the people that export are actually new Americans, or they grew up in another country. They've got some background of being international, so they're not as afraid of it. You were asking about industries. When I learned this, I was kind of surprised that the number one export from the US is actually services, like business to business services. And yeah, I think it's business to business, or, I can say services. I don't know if it's business to business or business to consumer. I'd have to think about that. But I thought it would be more project-based, like manufacturers or consumer products, but it's actually services. And we do a lot in this industry with, like lawyers, research companies, advertising agencies, PR companies. They all, they can all go international, and then they need translation. But I do see manufacturers going international, if they're manufacturing like big heavy equipment, that's a big one. And I see consumer products, because consumer products are on the internet and they're watching their metrics, and they can see who has an interest, and people can buy from around the world. There's even companies that if you want to order from Africa and you want to save on shipping charges, you can order through an African distribution company. So the product is sent to a place in the US, and then that distribution company takes all those products, gets it over to Africa for a much cheaper rate than if people were just buying it direct from Amazon and paying the shipping charges. So American goods are in demand. And our balance of trade is so far off that you can get support, you can get grants, and you can get some free consulting services from state trade representatives and federal government trade representatives from the Department of Commerce. It's one of the best kept secrets. And I'm happy to give you an introduction to any of your state or federal contacts, wherever you're located, because I've got lists of all those and can give you a direct introduction.
Wow, that sounds very powerful. And I think that could be a whole separate podcast about how to
Yeah.
go global and how to leverage US resources or other resources really to help you do that. But that sounds really fascinating. Let me just end with a little bit on the ROI of the translation itself. So it feels like there's a massive ROI is your argument for doing, legitimate, really good translations so you can access other markets. How do your clients think about the ROI? How do they think about the investment? Is it more like, hey, I just have to do this investment translation, I just have to be there? Or do they measure the ROI to say, oh, because I translated my material into French, I was able to reach a French audience and I was able to grow my business by X? Do they measure it, or is it just a cost of doing business because they're going in that direction?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. This past summer, we were awarded the E Award from the Department of Commerce. It was very exciting. It was a high honor. Gina Raimondo presented the awards, and we got to go down to DC and accept them. And as part of the application, they asked for stories on what difference did it make in trade. And we got some really interesting reflections from the companies that we worked with. And some of them, they'll say, well, we have to do it because if you're a certain regulated product in Europe, you have to have a safety marking called a CE mark. And so any of the industries that have to have a CE mark have to do translation of their user manuals and safety documents. And so, a lot of them were that. Other ones, they're watching their analytics and they can see how the business is coming up. And so, the other thing that I talk to about companies is on measuring the ROI is if you decide that you want to translate your website, you don't have to go out and spend thousands and thousands of dollars on doing your whole website. You can either do a microsite or even just a landing page that's answering the key questions. And then as you see the increase in business, you can continue to add pages onto that because the search engines like that. They want to see a website that is continually adding new information. So it does. So, the best translation is not a one-time hit. It's developing a process over time so you can measure that ROI and continue to invest and grow in it.
Yeah. So there's a way to do it incrementally, make an
Yes.
investment in a set of languages, grow that business, and then eventually go all the way so that you've got everything done. As you said, in some industries, there's a regulatory requirement or a customer service requirement to get there. That's a powerful area, Wendy. I can think of a number of our clients who need to do this, and we need to be working together on that. It'd be really fun to connect on that. So
that would be awesome. Share the podcast or send them over, or we could do a call together. I am passionate about talking to people about how to do this and making introductions to the right people and sharing best practices. And, there's some free chapters of my book on my linked tree or on our website. You can access that. So I am all into helping whoever who's interested in exploring this.
that's great. So if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about your translation services or your book, how would they do that?
The best is probably to go to my link tree. If you don't know what that is, it's a site that it's got links to our website, to all my social medias, to the book, to the podcast. And it's just LINK, link tr.ee. So that's the link tree. And then you put /Wendy Pease, and that's P as in Peter, EASE. So
Great.
Linktree, Wendy Pease, and you can get all my links.
Excellent. That's great. Well, Wendy, thanks again for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. You're helping a lot of people make a big difference. So thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Or Dankeschön, I should say, since we talked about German.
Good to Shane. Have a good day.